Whoever wrote this question, I have no quarrel with you. I fully agree, all right? Yes, the SAT is a predictor, but yes, there's just reams of work that shows that it produces racial and class disparities, and actually it has to. Some people have done really sophisticated work to explain this. If the SAT advantaged a minority group, if any question on the SAT, so they actually do this, they look at the questions, they look at questions where African Americans do better than whites, they eliminate those questions. Why do they do that? Because those questions are regarded as anomalous. There's something wrong with the question if a discrete minority does better than the majority. Ethnic studies is just terrific. Asian American studies historically has been rooted in the community. It's been about social change. All these great books about the 1960s. I know it's a bygone era for everyone now. But the 1960s, that activism on this campus and over at San Francisco State and at UCLA, that's what gave rise to Asian American studies as a movement dedicated to you as students. Asian Americans are in case against Harvard. Yeah, all right, so here's a question about persuading parents. Now, there's a really interesting generational divide here. Some of you are probably dealing with this. You may know the open letter from African American students, Asian American students, to their parents about why they support Black Lives Matter. So there is a real generational divide. It's difficult. That's a personal question from whoever wrote it, so I'll give you a personal answer. I'm sometimes asked by people my age, late 40s, early 50s, who are recent arrivals. They say to me, will you come give a speech? You seem to be really good at giving speeches. We need you to give a speech at our Chinese school because our children are becoming American and they're too liberal. So we want you to come and explain, what's wrong with them. I think to myself, how do I politely explain I'm the wrong person to give that speech? You just think I'm like you because we're the same age, but I'm actually like a kid. I'm a little subversive, so sometimes I've thought about going to one of those schools and giving a speech and saying, more power to you, right? This is a great question. One of the challenges, and I'll bet this applies to more than one of you in this room, as it did for me, is how do you talk to your parents, especially when they literally speak another language? Invite me back for another speech someday, and I'll give a whole talk. I say this with respect, I'll just give you the first 2 seconds of this talk. I talk sometimes entitled, Everything My Asian Immigrant Parents Taught Me Turns Out to Be Wrong. Now, that's a joke of a title. I wouldn't be who I am were not for the high standards that my parents set. But I had that experience, I'll tell you, growing up in Detroit in the 1970s, some of you may have had. I'm ashamed to admit this now, but I was embarrassed with my parents. I was a little angry with them because I faced bullying, teasing, and talking, the common cruelty of childhood. Being called chink, jack, and goop, being asked, do you eat dogs? How can you see with eyes like that? Are your parents communists? The ching chong, pulling your eyes back kind of thing. And when I would talk to my parents about this, they would scold me. They would say, you should try harder to fit in. It was only much later that I forgave them because I realized they weren't blaming me, they were blaming themselves because they were such strong believers in the American dream. They didn't know what racial prejudice was. We didn't march for civil rights. They didn't speak the language of civil rights because they literally spoke another language. But they thought that my brothers and I, we would just be accepted as Americans because we were born here. What was important is I realized my parents blamed themselves. They thought they faced bias because they had accents, because they ate funny foods, because when we watched television they didn't quite laugh at the right time, because if there was a dispute with the phone company they would need my help as an interpreter and translator. Maybe some of you in this room have had that experience. So my parents, they figured it was their own fault. That's why they faced this reaction, the stares, being denied loans, not being able to buy a house in the neighborhood where they could afford to, just barely, but where they were told there just weren't houses available. And it's because of those experiences, because as I've gotten older, I'm now the age that my parents were when I was your age. So as I've gotten older, I've realized my parents didn't have the language. And if they did speak up, people would mock them for their accents. They wouldn't stand before a group, even of other Asians, to give a speech. But I can. And you can. So I'll close on this. I know there are a few more questions, but we don't just have a right. We have a responsibility. It is to our elders, it is to our younger brothers and sisters. Let us, those of us who care about these issues, who want to be Asian Americans, who really are Americans, we've put down our roots here, we have a stake. Let us not be used. Let us not act just in raw, short-term self-interest. But let us live up to these ideals and ask, what can we as individuals and as a community do that will help America become its ideal? When Gunnar Myrdal wrote The American Dilemma, to give that phrase to racial issues, he wrote that not because he thought that there was a divide among races. He wrote that because he thought there was a gap between the aspirations that we professed and the practices we engaged in. His words, those of W.E.B. Du Bois when he wrote The Problem of the 20th Century is the Problem of the Color Line, ring as true today as they did then. And Du Bois concluded that sentence with something relevant to us in this century. The relation of the darker to lighter races of men in Asia and Africa and the Americas and the islands of the sea. That is all of us. This is the project that attracted us in this unique experiment of self-governance. We, Asian Americans, have a unique role to play. Thank you so much.
Like Professor Wu was talking about, what is our collective responsibility to take action, right? So we're going to have a few people come up and talk about ways that you can get involved. We're going to have Professor Harvey Dong come up first, and then after that, a representative from Southeast Asian Student Coalition, and then Mia Summers, and then me, and then we'll close out. So, Professor Harvey Dong.
Call to action, I would say that it's not just saying, oh, I'm in favor of that, but it's actually wanting to do something that actually convinces others to the cause, right? So it's more like, what can you actually do? You know, can you do something about it? Are you willing to do it, right? And I was kind of put on that spot for me and these others who were teaching Asian American studies were put on that spot when this group Asian Americans, AACE, Asian American Coalition for Education. Frank was talking about it. They made a statement in response to Chancellor Harold Chris. And they said some pretty racist stuff, criticizing Harold Chris for her favoring this idea of increasing the Hispanic student population 25% in the next 10 years. And then that way, that would give UC Berkeley HSI status, okay, which would mean more funding and actually programs for everyone on campus. So this group, Asian American Coalition for Education, sent a letter to our chancellor demanding that she retract the statement and thereby qualify UC Berkeley to become an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institute. AACE argued that there was, quote, a dimension of immorality in doing this, in considering race beyond a person's ability. The letter was followed by a press statement charging that this goal of HSI status was a shameless proclamation of a Hispanic quota. So basically, they were saying that on behalf of Asian Americans, this program should not exist. UC Berkeley should not have a goal of 25% Hispanic in the next 10 years. Okay. So we felt that there was a lot of racially charged and divisive arguments in their narrative, and it presented this idea that Latinos and Hispanics weren't welcome here at UC Berkeley campus. So we felt that we had to do something. So we kind of talked it over to each other, and we cranked out a statement, and we said that this was racist, and there's no quota, racial quota involved. This is just a targeted goal of 25%. Okay. So we did a critique of it, and then after that, we were trying to decide, well, what do we want to do with it next? Should we wait, or should we make it public? And what we did was we released it, and I think we had about, over 200 signatures. Yeah. So that was sent to the chancellor, that these 200 support this idea of HSI status here at UC Berkeley. And in response, the chancellor sent an email to my email address stating, I wish to express my profound respect and appreciation for this powerful statement in support of UC Berkeley's intent to qualify as an HSI serving institution by 2028. With its reliance on facts and firm embrace of important shared values, your message gives me hope and confidence that our community can unite and rise to meet the challenges before us. Okay, so that's a chancellor statement. But I think an even better response to our statement were the responses from our Chicana, Latino, Latina studies, librarians, instructors, and staff who said, thank you for doing this. It actually means a lot. They saw the buzz about this, and they felt that it was something that meant a lot to them. Okay. So this idea of solidarity, when racism is spoken, who's going to challenge it? I would say to not be afraid to speak out against it. Because some of these groups they have strategists behind them. Ed Blum, whole lifetime strategizing, trying to do away with civil rights. But at the same time, they kind of project this view that this is a dominant thing that's going to create and it's going to overcome us, and we could only be silent. But I would say that it's really important for Asian Americans in particular to take a strong position. So action means actually speaking, doing something about it.